Listen, what I'm about to tell you has been hidden in plain sight for 500 years. 500 years ago, a single decision changed the course of human history forever. It wasn't a battle won or a king crowned. It wasn't a discovery made or a treaty signed. It was simpler than that, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone decided that promises could replace gold, that paper could substitute for silver, that trust could stand in for treasure. And from that moment forward, every empire that followed this path learned the same brutal lesson. The promises always break, the paper always burns, and the trust always dies. What if I told you that this pattern has repeated itself with clockwork precision across 5 centuries? What if I told you that every single time, the people in power swore it would be different, that their system was stronger, that their currency was safer? And what if I told you that right now, today, we are watching the exact same pattern unfold again? The dollar sits at the center of the global economy like a spider in a web. Every trade, every transaction, every nation's reserves are tied to its strength. But strength built on promises has a fatal flaw. It can vanish overnight. And when it does, the collapse isn't gradual. It's sudden, violent, and total. 5 empires learned this lesson the hard way. The question isn't whether we'll be the 6th. The question is whether we'll see it coming in time, and whether you'll be ready when it happens. Here's what the history books won't tell you. Currency collapse isn't an accident. It's a choice. Every empire that ever fell made the same choice, convinced themselves of the same lies, and walked the same path to destruction. They started with real money backed by real value. They ended with worthless paper backed by empty promises. And the transformation always follows the same stages, the same timeline, the same inevitable conclusion, every single time. The first empire to discover this pattern was Spain in the 16th century. They controlled more gold and silver than any nation in history. Ships loaded with treasure crossed the Atlantic in endless convoys. The Spanish crown thought wealth meant metal, and they had more metal than anyone. But here's the twist that destroyed them. Having too much money is just as dangerous as having too little. When Spanish silver flooded Europe, prices exploded. What once cost a single coin suddenly cost dozens. The empire with the most treasure became the empire where ordinary people couldn't afford bread. Spain learned that real wealth isn't about the money you have. It's about the value that money holds. But Spain's mistake was just the beginning. The pattern was set, and every empire that followed would walk the same road. With minor variations but identical endings, the Dutch Republic rose next, built on trade and banking rather than treasure. They created the first modern stock exchange, the first central bank, the first system of paper promises backed by future profits. For a century, it worked brilliantly. Amsterdam became the financial capital of the world. Dutch merchants controlled global commerce. Their currency was trusted from London to Beijing. And then the promises started to outweigh the reality. Too much paper, too little substance. The bubble burst. Fortunes vanished, and the Dutch discovered what Spain had learned before them. Paper wealth is an illusion that can disappear faster than it appeared. The British Empire came next, and they thought they had solved the puzzle. Instead of relying on treasure or promises alone, they backed their currency with gold. The gold standard meant every pound was redeemable for a fixed amount of precious metal. It was supposed to be foolproof, unbreakable, permanent. For 2 centuries it seemed to work. Britain dominated global trade, built the largest empire in history, and their currency became the foundation of international commerce. But even gold standards have a fatal weakness. They limit how much money governments can create, and governments always want to create more money than they have gold to back. When World War I erupted, the British faced a choice: keep the gold standard and lose the war, or abandon the gold standard and print the money they needed to win. They chose victory over honesty, inflation over integrity. The gold standard died, and with it, the last anchor between money and reality. The French tried a different approach during their revolution. They created a currency backed by land rather than metal. The assignats were supposed to be redeemable for church property seized by the revolutionary government. It was innovative, patriotic, and completely catastrophic. The government printed assignats to fund the revolution, then printed more to fund the wars that followed. Soon, there were so many assignats in circulation that they became worthless. Peasants refused to sell food for paper money. Cities erupted in bread riots. The currency collapse helped to trigger the terror. And the revolution devoured itself. France learned that backing money with promises about future assets is just another way of backing money with nothing at all. The Confederate States of America provides perhaps the most dramatic example of currency collapse in modern history. Desperate to fund their war effort, the Confederacy printed money with reckless abandon. Confederate dollars flooded the South while goods became increasingly scarce. By the war's end, it took hundreds of Confederate dollars to buy what had once cost a single coin. Soldiers were paid in currency so worthless they couldn't afford to eat. Families carried wheelbarrows full of money to buy a loaf of bread. When the Confederacy fell, their currency didn't just lose value, it became literally worthless overnight. Millions of people discovered that their life savings had turned into colorful paper suitable only for kindling. But here's what makes this pattern truly terrifying. Each empire thought they were different. Each generation believed their system was stronger, smarter, more sophisticated than what came before. The Spanish thought treasure made them invincible. The Dutch thought trade and banking made them untouchable. The British thought gold made them permanent. The French thought revolutionary fervor made them unbeatable. The Confederates thought determination made them unstoppable. They were all wrong. And they were all wrong in exactly the same way. Every single one of these empires started with money that meant something real: gold, silver, land, goods, value you could hold in your hand and measure with certainty. Every single one ended with money that meant nothing more than a government's promise to pay. And every single government, when faced with crisis, chose to break that promise rather than face the consequences of keeping it. The pattern is so consistent it reads like a formula. Stage 1, real money backed by real value. Stage 2, gradual replacement of real backing with paper promises. Stage 3, crisis that tempts leaders to print more money than they can back. Stage 4, loss of confidence as people realize the promises are empty. Stage 5, collapse as the currency becomes worthless and the empire falls apart. We've seen this pattern repeat across 5 centuries, 5 continents, and 5 different systems. The technology changes, the names change, the faces change. But the fundamental forces remain identical. And right now, today, the United States dollar is following the exact same trajectory. Your heart should be pounding right now. Because what comes next affects every dollar in your wallet. The dollar began its journey exactly like every empire before it. In 1792, the Coinage Act established the American currency system with precise backing. Each dollar was defined as a specific weight of silver or gold. You could walk into any bank and exchange your paper for metal at a fixed rate. The promise was simple, clear, and seemingly unbreakable. For over a century, it held. But promises have a way of becoming inconvenient when governments need money they don't have. The Civil War forced the first major crack in the system. Lincoln's administration issued greenbacks paper money not backed by precious metals, but by the government's word alone. It was supposed to be temporary, a wartime necessity that would disappear once the crisis passed. Some of it did disappear. But the precedent was set. America had tasted the drug of printing money, and like every empire before it, found the temptation impossible to resist permanently. The real transformation came in stages so gradual that most people never noticed until it was too late. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was created, giving a private institution the power to control America's money supply. In 1933, Roosevelt confiscated private gold ownership, making it illegal for Americans to own the very metal that backed their currency. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement made the dollar the world's reserve currency, but still maintained the fiction of gold backing. Then came the final break. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon severed the last link between the dollar and gold. He called it temporary, a brief suspension to protect America's gold reserves. That temporary suspension is now over 50 years old. The dollar became what economists call a fiat currency, money backed by nothing more than government decree and public confidence. And just like every empire before us, we told ourselves this time was different. The numbers tell a story that should terrify anyone paying attention. In 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, America's national debt was around $400 billion. Today, it exceeds $30 trillion. That's not just inflation. That's the inevitable result of removing all constraints on money creation. When governments can print unlimited amounts of currency, they always do. The temptation is too great, the political benefits too immediate, and the consequences too distant for most politicians to care. But debt is just one symptom of a deeper disease. The real danger lies in what happens when confidence breaks. Every fiat currency in history has eventually collapsed, not because of economic fundamentals, but because people stop believing in the promises behind the paper. And that confidence built over decades, can vanish in days. Look around the world today, and you'll see the cracks forming. China and Russia are conducting trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. European nations are quietly reducing their dollar reserves. Oil producers are accepting payment in yuan for the first time since the petrodollar system began. These aren't random events. They're symptoms of declining faith in American monetary promises. The most dangerous part is how normal it all feels. Rome didn't collapse in a day, and neither did Spain, France, or Britain. Their currencies weakened gradually, then suddenly. Their empires crumbled slowly, then all at once. The people living through it mostly didn't realize what was happening until the final collapse made denial impossible. Americans today carry wallets full of paper that has no backing except the government's promise to accept it for taxes. They store wealth in bank accounts that exist only as digital entries on computer servers. They trust in a system that creates trillions of new dollars with keystrokes, diluting the value of every dollar already in existence. And they do all of this while believing their money is somehow different, somehow safer, somehow more permanent than every failed currency that came before. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Like Spain with its silver, America prints money to fund endless wars. Like the Dutch with their speculation, America has created financial bubbles that dwarf anything in history. Like Britain abandoning gold, America has abandoned every constraint that once limited monetary excess. Like revolutionary France, America backs its currency with promises about future assets that may never materialize. And like the Confederacy, America is discovering that printing money doesn't create wealth. It only redistributes it from savers to debtors, from the prudent to the reckless, from the future to the present. The pattern is playing out exactly as it has 5 times before. Stage 1 was completed long ago. We had real money backed by real value. Stage 2 happened gradually through the 20th century as paper promises replaced precious metal backing. Stage 3 began in earnest after the 2008 financial crisis, as money creation accelerated to levels that would have shocked previous generations. We are now deep into Stage 4, watching confidence erode as more nations and institutions question whether American promises can be trusted indefinitely. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes with a precision that should make anyone holding dollars extremely nervous. Every empire that walked this path convinced itself that this time was different. Every government that chose printing over prudence believed their system was stronger than those that failed before. Every generation that watched their currency collapse thought they were facing something unprecedented and unique. They were all wrong. And their confidence in their own exceptionalism was precisely what made their downfall inevitable. The United States is not exempt from the laws of economics, the patterns of history, or the consequences of monetary debasement. We are simply the latest empire to believe we can suspend the rules that destroyed every empire before us. The question is no longer whether the dollar will follow the same path as every fiat currency in history. The question is whether enough people will recognize the pattern before Stage 5 begins, and whether anything can be done to change course before the inevitable conclusion arrives. 500 years of history have spoken, and their message is crystal clear. The dollar's path is not unique, not unprecedented, not different from the currencies that came before it. It is following the exact same trajectory that destroyed the Spanish real, the Dutch guilder, the British pound's gold backing, the French assignat, and the Confederate dollar. The technology has changed. The scale has grown. But the fundamental pattern remains identical. We stand at Stage 4 of a 5-stage collapse, watching confidence erode as the world slowly awakens to what history has always taught. Promises are not wealth. Paper is not value. And trust built on nothing will always return to nothing. The signs are everywhere for those willing to see them. Nations abandoning dollar reserves, currencies bypassing American systems, debt levels that would have toppled any previous empire. The most dangerous delusion is believing we're somehow different. Every empire thought they were the exception. Every government convinced itself their system was stronger. Every generation believed their currency would be the first to break the pattern. They were all catastrophically wrong. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore its lessons, it will crush you all the same. The question isn't whether the dollar will join the graveyard of failed currencies. The question is whether you'll recognize the pattern before everyone else does. What will you do tomorrow morning when you realize the dollar is following the exact same path as every dead currency in history? How will you protect your family when Stage 5 begins? Because it will begin. This isn't a question of if. This is a question of when. If this opened your eyes to what's coming, hit subscribe. History has all the answers. The only question is whether you're ready to listen.